Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic.
All right, we're live. John Barklow, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bo. Stoked to be here, buddy. Help you out.
Yeah, man. How are you been?
Been good. You know, kind of middle of summer and shooting a lot, training a lot, mostly in the mornings or late evenings. It's been so hot out here.
Yeah,
and
you guys been having that hot
kind of
weather.
Formalizing my hunting plans, and yeah, you guys been getting baked.
Yeah. I didn't know if it was the same out in the West or not, but it's been pretty brutal here.
Yeah, where I'm living here in Montana, it just maybe last week started getting hot, so nothing to complain about. A lot of good moisture, a lot of tall grass. We're still getting rain, so you know the hope is that there's going to be really good antler growth, and because we had a hard winter, up here. But yeah, getting excited. The season's going to be here real quick. Antelope results just came out today. So drew my resident antelope tag, and my buddy from Alaska drew his. So we'll be going after speed goats here in like a month, a little less.
Oh, wow. They don't give you much time once you find out you draw.
Well, last year I think they, don't quote me, but I think they told us like August 2nd, and the season started like the 15th or 14th. So last year they were really late.
Yeah.
So this year's actually, they gave you plenty of time this year.
Yeah, and I guess being a resident, it's not as big of a deal to plan far ahead, but I'm sure you still like to know that.
Yeah, you know, like I said, my buddy's flying down from Alaska, and he wants to buy a plane ticket. So, anyways, he was the one that told me today the draw results were out. So, anxiously buying a ticket to come down. But yeah, it's cool. I may even end up doing a hunt the very end of July on like it might be like a deprivation tag, I think, but might be able to hunt some elk in the end of July. We'll see. More to follow on that, but I might be starting my season here real quick.
Yeah, that's another week or so.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
10 days,
So anyways, John, before we get too far into this here, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and then and tell the audience who you are if they don't know already?
Yeah, so right now I'm the big game product manager for Sitka Gear, which means I basically manage the development of all the product that the big game line puts out, work with designers and developers and some of our athletes, ambassadors, folks like yourself, right, just working on product, getting ideas and trying to lay out, you know, a line plan, not only today and this year, but, you know, some projects we're looking almost 5 years out on. So it keeps me busy. Also, you know, spent a lot of time in the military, trained a lot of special operations forces. So that allowed me to work on developing gear, not only developing gear and testing gear, but then also teaching people how to use that gear and then being able to observe a lot of people and how they interacted with the gear. So, you know, maybe we had something that had a certain intent or we taught it a certain way, but then we realized that, you know, the majority of the people actually interpreted it a certain way or did it a different way. So I was really able to learn and adapt, not just the way I taught people, but also kind of how the way we developed gear, and even how I utilize gear, right? Because I got to see a lot of things that people did right and wrong. And then prior to that, I grew up in Ohio and self-taught archery hunter. Struggled for many, many, many years on that, but basically a lifelong bow hunter. And just been a passion of mine for whatever reason since I was a little kid. And, you know, every time I get a bow in my hand, I was just shooting before I jumped on the call with you. And every time I get a bow in my hand and shoot an arrow, I'm just like a little kid again. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Where did you grow up in Ohio at? Just general area?
on the eastern side of Cleveland.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Lyndhurst, South Euclid, those areas. Mentor's kind of right in there. My brother still lives back there, and my dad. But, obviously, I mean, at the time it was good whitetail hunting. It wasn't maybe as well known as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But we still had big deer, and every one of them outsmarted me.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I do a lot of work just on the southeastern side of Cleveland as well. So I was just in that area all last week. Yep.
Oh, right on. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that's my old stomping grounds.
Huh.
So last year I was able to go back and hunt southern Ohio, which I'd never done when I was living back there. I went down and hunted southern Ohio with a guy, Donnie Wilson, a good friend of mine and Sitka ambassador, but just really big buck country, Adams County. And of course, as my whitetail luck kind of held out, I did see a couple shooters, but they never got close enough for a shot. But that was the first time I'd hunted Ohio in probably, almost 30 years.
Really?
So it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't bring you any luck either, huh?
No, whitetail, certain species come easier for people, it seems, for whatever reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whitetail are one of those animals that they definitely make me earn it. Like, there is no gimme. I'm not like an opening morning kind of guy. I'm like, last evening of the 12th day of sitting all day, and I'll, if I'm lucky, seal the deal. But
I think it might have been Donnie Wilson's doing too, putting you in a tree where no deer come by.
He was so generous. I mean, we were even hunting out a couple of his stands, right? Because he had already tagged out. So if the weather was right for that stand, he's like, "Go sit in my stand. I know what's in there," And we did see one big deer for sure. Me and the other guy, we were hunting, and boy, that deer, once he kind of got an idea that somebody was hunting him, he was not showing up again. He was like 2 miles away on a trail camera of a buddy's.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, anyways, so to go back a little bit, what you were saying about you were training special operations as far as what sort of training were you doing with them? And if I'm correct, it was up in Kodiak, Alaska.
Yeah, so we were based out of Kodiak, Alaska, and I mean we did travel quite a bit to other mountain ranges to do more, I'll call it advanced training for different units, but predominantly we taught in Kodiak. Predominantly it was to paint with a broad brush, we'll call it cold weather, definitely inclement weather, almost always up there. Taught things like basic survival, land navigation, how to use and exploit terrain to your advantage, and not quote the enemies, how to, wear clothing and nutrition and things like that for what the military would call mountain warfare, right? So training guys to be able to go into, essentially an unknown mountain range. I mean, obviously there's some knowledge, and be able to go in there and survive on their own. Not necessarily living off the land, but certainly if they had to, and leave when the job was done, not when Mother Nature dictated that they had to leave.
Yeah. So you've been doing quite a bit with as far as building gear systems and testing them for quite a long time.
Yeah, so I've been doing that for 20 years now, which is kind of crazy to say, but back in the day when the war kicked off and all that, a lot of patriotism in the country. I mean, still is, but we had some amazing top of the line technical outdoor brands, reach out to us because we needed to basically upgrade all of our clothing and equipment and systems and techniques. And so got to work with some, amazing designers and developers and companies And really that's kind of what started me kind of down the development road, but, did a lot of testing with those folks and kind of learned a lot about fabrics and things like that. But like I said, and then we were able to take it to the field, which, to me obviously was the more enjoyable part of it. Not that I didn't enjoy it all, but pretty cool, from start to finish, we kind of got to do that.
Yeah. So anyways, John, I want to jump in a little bit back when, kind of when I first met you and before that, how kind of I got introduced to technical clothing. So it's, as you know, I mean, you come from Ohio. When you were younger and getting into hunting, were you really aware of, what technical clothing could do for you, or technical gear layering systems, or was that kind of new to you?
I really didn't have a clue. I was probably like everybody else back then, especially where I came from. I didn't come from the mountains. Really didn't have a clue. Did a lot of, camping and exploring and backpacking, me and my friends, but, we were wearing cotton t-shirts and jeans and, you name it, kind of all the standard mistakes nowadays. But no, I really didn't have an idea until I really, my interest was beginning to be piqued with mountaineering, and those folks, that community, certainly at a higher level, they had already figured it out, and were beginning to have companies were sprouting up, and they were beginning to figure that out and kind of start to talk about it. But yeah, it was all pretty foreign to me back then.
I remember, I mean, up until probably even 2011, I think I'd wore nothing but cotton stuff and, maybe, a Goretex jacket or something along those lines. But as far as layering systems I had zero idea on how it all worked. So I just always thought that when, I wore my, the old surplus BDUs out in the woods and cotton underwear and a cotton t-shirt underneath what I thought was a synthetic performance base layer, but I had cotton underneath it and everything else that that's just the way it was. You get sweaty and you never dry out when you get to your tree stand and all of these other things. And again, I'm speaking from an Eastern perspective, mostly whitetail hunting, turkey hunting, things along those lines. But I just thought that's the way that it was. And, if you were sweating, walking into your tree stand, then you were basically screwed for the rest of the day. And there was nothing you could do about it. And I think it was somewhere in 2011-ish is when I started getting introduced to it, technical style clothing and synthetic base layers. But still, I wasn't, completely grasping that, cotton was the enemy for a lot of those things. And I think it was around 2013, I was introduced to Sitka Gear from a buddy of mine. He sold me an old Stratus jacket, one of the original ones. And I wore that with Windstopper in it. And that was my first, I guess my first experience with that. And I did have some other synthetic base layers, and I was starting to grasp that idea of what it's like to, build a system, but still wasn't completely there. And when I started researching going out west in 2014 or 2015, I was really getting involved in it. And by that time I started, getting into some more, different clothing and some additional Sitka pieces, and eventually started working for a Sitka dealer, Bucks and Bows Archery. And when I went there is when I really started learning and really being intrigued on the whole idea of how your body works with your clothing system, and if you have it set up correctly and know how your body works, can be a well-oiled machine, and you don't need to be as uncomfortable as I originally thought that you did. And so with all that being said, I met you at the ATA show, I believe in 2016, and got talking, and I think you just started spinning the wheels in my head, just sitting there going through and talking about all these different components and fabrics and how they work together. And I've been obsessed with, with learning about it and testing it ever since. But yeah,
no, I've followed you. You've done some of the tests and posted them. I think on your Facebook page and some of those places. And I'm trying not to be demeaning to anyone, certainly, and not the community at large, but really the hunting community is running at least 20 years behind where the mountaineering community is. They've been doing this for a long time, and really, and not just because I work for the company, but I'll give, credit to the founders of Sitka, which was 2008, if I recall correctly, but maybe a little, maybe earlier than that. But, that they had this idea. I mean, a lot of us that were hunting out west already were wearing, these technical clothing pieces from, these other brands, Arc'teryx or Patagonia or somebody like that. Because we had kind of, stumbled upon it. Like I kind of came into that actually through more of a mountaineering aspect. But they're kind of running 20 years behind. And so, there's all these companies that have sprouted up now that are making these synthetic technical pieces. And, I don't know if it's probably a little daunting to people to try to figure it out. Podcasts like this maybe will help people kind of get a grasp of it. But it's funny you mentioned the cotton, because the only rule I have that you shouldn't break when you build your own system is just make sure you do not incorporate cotton into that system. Everybody's going to build something a little different, but the cotton for the most part, for a whitetail hunter or a Western mountain hunter, is just not a good thing.
No. And that's the thing too, is that I definitely want to get the point across, is it's not just for Western hunting. It can have so many benefits from, for even whitetail hunting. Doesn't matter if you're walking 100 yards to your stand, or if you have to, pack in 3 miles or so to your stands in some of the Appalachian regions. It doesn't matter. It still is very important. And again, even putting, Sitka as a company off to the side, just the idea of building these systems that fit you, and understanding the concept basically of why you would do that and how it works is crucial. And I know the first time when I introduced my dad to some of that stuff, he's I would consider one of the most hardcore hunters of whitetail that I've ever met. And when it comes the rut, he never leaves the tree, it seems like, and he's just always out and come back soaking wet and everything else. And he never complained about it, but he wasn't real happy a lot of times. And once I introduced him to some of that stuff, and switching to some different base layers and synthetic base layers and merino wool socks and the whole bit, it was like, it was tough for him to come out and admit it, but he's like, this is a game changer. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, let me tell you 2 stories. So you talked about Stratus system, and you talked about obviously whitetail hunting and walking your stand. And so it was 2 years ago, I guess, when I was at Donnie's in Southern Ohio, and there's a little pro shop there that these folks have. And so they sell some different things. And so a gentleman walked in, and I happened to be in there, and Donnie and he wanted to buy some Sitka gear. So anyways, he ended up with a Stratus system, probably the most versatile, in my opinion, most versatile whitetail system, that we have. And he was so excited to go out the next morning. So on that farm, you don't drive anywhere in the mornings, you have to walk. So you could walk up to, half a mile. I think this gentleman walked a couple 100 yards. And so come back at noon or whatever, and he's already back and changed out, and went and asked him how his morning went. And he said, not well. He said he was miserable. He said the Sitka Gear didn't work, and that he was cold the whole time, and he had to get down out of his tree early and come back. And I was like, huh. I was like, that's interesting. I said, well, what did you wear? And he said, well, he had his cotton underwear on. He had blue jeans. He had a cotton T-shirt, and he put the Stratus over top of it, and he walked to his stand, and he didn't probably realize how warm that layer really is. He got sweated up, climbed into his tree all wet, and then stayed damp, not the whole time, but long enough that he got chilled and decided he had had enough and got down. And, he said the Sitka system didn't work. And I said, well, no, you just didn't utilize it properly. And so we went through the part of educating them about, you have to wear synthetic base layers and this and that. And you have to, make sure you walk comfortably cool to your stand, blah, 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 and went through the process. And then, the next day he climbs up in the tree, or that afternoon, I guess, and, had a much more enjoyable experience, but it took a little bit of education. You can't just, it's not a Superman's cape, right? It's not just going to like magically make you warm or, breathe, breathable, no sweat kind of thing. You have to have some education. And then the second story is I had a lease with a couple friends in northern Missouri, and I was the only one at the time wearing Sitka, and I didn't even work for the company then. And so same deal, we're there for 10 or 12 days and it's the rut. And so you want to spend every minute you can on stand. And like I told you, I have to stay there basically for 10 days before I see anything. And, so I'm there all day, every day, just ride it out. And my buddies are getting in, standard thing, getting in a couple hours, coming out, going back in the evening, coming out. And, they're seeing deer, but they're not seeing what they came there to see. And so my one friend asked me, he says, how are you able to sit there all day in like 3 layers of clothing and not just be freezing your butt off? He goes, I know you're not tougher than me. And I said, well, it's not about the number of layers I'm wearing. It's about the proper application of the layers. So eventually, we had the lease for several years. So eventually then before the next season, he's like, hey, I'm going to buy some Sitka gear. What would you recommend? So I told him what to get. And, sure enough, he goes there and all of a sudden he's sitting in the stand all day. So then the third guy wanted it. So now we're all sitting in the stand all day, and they're like, yeah, you're right. You weren't tougher than us, but it's amazing that you can be this warm, this comfortable in this few layers. I can climb in my tree stand. I can draw my bow, all these things. I can, just have a much more enjoyable experience. And then all of a sudden we were all becoming successful because obviously the more time you put in that time of year, right?
Yeah.
The better your odds are. So, it absolutely applies to the whitetail hunter. I don't care if you're walking, 200 or 300 yards to your stand or 2 or 3 miles like you do sometimes. Like, you have to understand, how it works, and you have to have the right clothing. It's your first line of defense really against the elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really critically important.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. And it's funny, when I first started wearing Sitka, I was in Southern Ohio with my dad and some of his friends, and we were at camp, and I was using, it's not a whitetail piece, but I was using the Kelvin Light vest, and I had it sitting on the table, and he picks it up, and he's like, is this thing actually warm? He goes, it feels like a feather. And I was like, he goes, if I found that in the woods, I would just leave it there. And he didn't know anything about, Sitka or what it was supposed to do. And I was explaining it to him and going through the process. I'm like, yeah, but when you use this between, your base layer and your mid layer, and then, put a shell over top of it like that, it holds all that heat in. And I was just, going through and explaining the process, but that's really what I wanted to dive into on this podcast, was kind of going through from the base layers out to your outer shell and kind of what the importance of each layer is. And and again, and the same concept is basically across the board, whether you're, again, hunting whitetails or you're hunting in the mountains of Colorado or Montana. The concept seems to be the same, at least the way I look at it. It's just the pieces are a little bit different.
Yeah, no, I would agree. The basic concept is the same. I mean, really, any clothing system that you're going to build starts with the base layer. So the base layer is, we'll call the base layer the one that's directly contacting your skin. And, that's the foundation of whatever system you build. You should have a base layer. And no matter what the temperature is, right, you're going to have something that is the base layer. You can have synthetic and you can have wool. And, that's a discussion maybe unto itself. And, some people, if they've heard me on other podcasts, may think that I'm anti-wool, and actually I'm not. I would say I'm pro-synthetic. But for whitetail hunting, I tend to gravitate towards wool. I just like the feel of it, against my skin when I'm sitting there for long periods of time. I like that it's naturally antimicrobial, which means, it won't stink, which obviously when you're whitetail hunting, you're trying to do anything you can to mitigate stink. When I'm out west here or up north, I prefer synthetic, just because it dries so quickly, and that I know that, when it gets wet, either from sweat, right, or from some exterior force, that it's going to dry incredibly quick. Because if you think about it, your base layer, the one that contacts your skin, is really the most important one that needs to stay dry. So for instance, if I have 2 layers of clothing on and my base layer is dry, but the exterior face of, say my puffy jacket is wet, that doesn't really affect my comfort. That doesn't really affect my body's ability to thermoregulate itself. It's the one that's directly next to your skin. So if you can keep that dry and warm, then, you will be comfortable, and comfort will equate to, keeping your head in the game, being more aware, glassing harder, or whatever the case may be, sitting there still, which hopefully equates to more success. So that's the base layer.
So
and
real quick, John, I want to dive into that for a second. One thing that I know that was kind of an eye opener to me that you brought up to me when we were talking in the past was correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I took it was you recommend having a pretty lightweight base layer, right, to really pull the moisture out, and even in cold weather conditions, you want to have a pretty lightweight base layer.
Right. So yeah, let me clarify. Thanks for bringing that up. So to me, a base layer, the one directly next to your skin, you should always start with a very thin layer. So, a lightweight version. I would not go directly to, say, a heavyweight wool piece or a heavy synthetic. I always put on the lightest, right, that whatever company I'm choosing, the lightest that they offer. It should also fit. That's the layer that should fit, not tight, but it should be contoured to your skin. So the reason that is because that the better the skin contact, the better that moisture will move, right? That you can move moisture from your skin out. But I always start with the lightest, and then if I'm going to go to, say, a heavier, say, bottom, then I would go and put the heavier weight bottom on. And, I don't know how deep you want to dive into this, Bo, but, when we're building base layers, for instance, or we're building different layers, you'll notice that if you look at some people's base layer that, the lightweight it looks pretty uniform, pretty smooth, not a lot of structure to it. And then as you build it out and, say, go to a heavyweight, you'll start to see things like grid patterns and dots and, looks like little waffles on the bottom. And the reason that is because you're trying to build a structure that is, designed to sit a little farther off your skin. And so you want to increase the surface area to continue to make that garment efficient of not only pulling the moisture into it, but then spreading it across its face so that it can then transfer on to the next level. So if you go and put a heavyweight directly onto your skin, you're not going to have the most efficient transfer of moisture that you would if you started with a lightweight and then applied, a mid or heavy on top of that.
So so when you have that lightweight on and it's pushing the moisture out to your mid layer or the layer that you're discussing, like say your typical waffle, is that what we call it, waffle layer? I guess the backing on it,
or grid,
or the way the grid or the waffle pattern looks is you have the piece that contact your skin, then you have a little bit of a gap in between, and that gap seems to be the part that pushes the moisture out, but then the actual thicker part of it is what's holding your heat in and keeping you warm in colder conditions. Did I explain that right?
Yeah, it does a combination of things, but essentially what you're creating is more surface area, so that you have the ability for that garment to capture moisture or more moisture, so to speak, right? So there's the volume to do it. Part of that loft obviously adds some warmth, but then it also allows it to be dispersed or dissipated on the face, so that it can then move on to whatever the next layer is, right? Either the outside atmosphere or the next layer of clothing. So,
okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you get down to it like that, but honestly, that's the thought that's put into it by the people that make the textiles. That's the thought put into it by the people, that pick those textiles to build certain garments, right? They're built to be worn certain ways. And that's not to scare anybody away. I mean, it's not like you'll have a, really, really bad experience if you don't do that, but to have the best experience, right? Mm-hmm. We did design them to be worn certain ways.
Yeah. No, and that's I didn't mean to dig super deep there. I just get interested myself and like to know the deep roots of it. But anyways, yeah, I definitely don't want to, confuse anybody on that either, but definitely, like you were saying, so the lightweight against your skin, then if you're doing a mid layer a little bit heavier, and where would you transition from there?
After like a base layer or the different weights of long underwear?
Correct.
Yeah. So then, generally speaking, I go to my, what we'll call outerwear, for a Western hunter, right? Or a big game hunter, we'll say, that would be like your soft shell pant or a soft shell jacket, something like that. For a whitetail hunter, it could be, that could be your bib. Like you could jump right to your bib. And essentially that layer, I mean, it does a bunch of things, but, one of the things it does is it's a protective layer, not only to you, but your base layer. So, my soft shell pants protect me from getting my base layer tore up. Or, my boxers or whatever. They provide pockets. They provide the camouflage. They provide, some wind repellency or water repellency, something like that. Our pants, a lot of the big game pants have knee pockets. But you kind of jump from your base layers and and mid layer insulation or that heavier weight base layer, to an outerwear piece. It could be bibs for the whitetail hunter, or a jacket, something like that. For the big game guy, we'll just, for ease of discussion, we'll just say, that he could put that jacket on, or he could choose to just run around in his base layer top, depending on environmental conditions.
Okay. I gotcha. And, so basically in like, as far as your outer shell and what you're talking about there is what most people would think of as your normal, hunting jacket that you're grabbing hold
Correct.
of, the one that's, protecting you from the, I guess the weather conditions and whatever Mother Nature would throw at you there. And so.
Correct. Okay. Correct. And I'll and I know what you're thinking, but I think we'll cover it in the next piece. So, but yeah. And so for the whitetail person, I think it's, I think that's a layer where you may really start to consider something like Windstopper, right? Something to block the wind. I think it's crucially important for whitetail hunters to have something that blocks the wind to cut down or reduce convective heat loss. While you're sitting there in a tree and the wind's blowing against you, if you can block that wind and trap body heat, I think that's hugely important for all day comfort. For the Western guy, that's quite frankly, that's a layer where I a lot of times will opt to have a Windstopper type jacket. Sheds light rain and light snow, so we'll call it water resistant. Normally pretty quiet, very durable, and it's a layer for, depending on the season. It could be something you wear all day. It could be something you wear in the mornings and the evenings. But that's a layer where I would consider maybe like some type of Windstopper layer.
Okay. And when you say, as far as what exactly is the difference for everyone between Windstopper and Goretex, as far as obviously Goretex is the waterproof layer, but what as far as when people are looking at different pieces, why would you opt to go with a Windstopper piece versus a Goretex or vice versa?
Yeah, so Windstopper is obviously blocks the wind, hence the name, but it's more breathable than Goretex. The pores are larger, and then it's the way that the layers are laminated together that allows it also to be a little more breathable. And Windstopper, generally speaking, is the seams are not taped, although several garments in Sitka big game are taped. So we'll call Windstopper highly water resistant, but it doesn't have that guarantee to keep you dry. So it may function really well in the rain as soon as you get it. As soon as you get it out of the packaging, but over time, depending on how you wear it, if you have body oils and stuff that are constantly touching the inside, you may start to develop some small leaks. Whereas Goretex is, it's got the finer pores. It's always taped. The construction of the garment, the way, people that utilize Goretex, there's certain construction techniques for building pockets and zipper garages and things like that, and hoods that, make it inherently waterproof. So, if you want a true rain layer, you have to buy something like a Goretex. I like the versatility of Windstopper. I think it's something that's overlooked. My guess is there's, the majority of whitetail hunters don't hunt very often in the rain, but they probably hunt a lot in the wind. And so I think that is probably more important to the whitetail hunter than a rain layer. And also just the way we build a lot of our different Windstoppers, they tend to be very soft and quiet, whereas Goretex traditionally is a little louder. So again, for that archery hunter or that whitetail guy in a stand, that might not be the right layer for them.
Yeah, no. So that's an important point there. As far as I know, me personally, when I'm going, out west, if there is one piece that I'm going to cut out, say backpack hunting, a lot of times it'd be my Windstopper layer to replace with a Goretex layer. Last year I did hunt with the mountain jacket because it's basically feather light and there's about nothing to it. So I threw that in my pack as well with and also a rain jacket. But with whitetail hunting, I rarely use a rain jacket because of Windstopper's ability to still be water resistant enough. I've found that you can sit basically, and I don't want to tell anybody this and have someone come back and say it didn't work this way, but I feel comfortable sitting 4 or 5 hours in, a light rain or even a medium rain and not being soaked. I mean, you don't get wet with the Windstopper, and also it is a little bit quieter from the whitetail standpoint. But when you look at like some of the colder garments, and John, I know that you're not on the whitetail side of things as far as the products go, but for the listeners, the Fanatic jacket and bib system, which is for colder weather, we get a lot of questions down at the archery shop. Why does this not have Goretex in it? Well, it doesn't really need to be because of how cold it is when you're technically wearing it. Most of the time, it's going to be snow, right. And I have some pretty funny pictures of me sitting in just some ridiculous snowstorms with 4 inches of snow laying all over my bibs and jacket, and I sat all day like that in a December and rifle season in Pennsylvania, and never once felt moisture, on my skin from leaking through the jacket. So that's just a quick tidbit I wanted to kind of throw in there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you're not gonna get wet in that application. No, that's it. It does good. If you're going on a backpack hunt wherever, and you're going to be off the grid and away from the road and can't get out in a few hours, it's important for you to bring rain gear. I mean, it's, depending on where you are and the time of year, I mean, I consider it life-saving gear. If I get wet, I don't have to have, if I can stay dry, I'm good. I don't have to have a tent per se or something like that to ride the storm out. But if I'm soaked, it could become, a life and death situation pretty quick if you can't get to some kind of shelter. So, but yeah, for the whitetail guy, I mean, personally, I just don't enjoy hunting in the rain very much. And then, you always have to consider if you put a marginal hit on it, like a deer, are you going to be able to blood trail, or will that water from the rain compromise, your track job? But, to each his own there. But I would say Windstopper is a hugely important technology for the whitetail hunter, especially.
Yeah, no, definitely. But so like I was referring to a little bit there with when I do some big game hunting out west and everything, John. So let's dive into the next piece there. As far as, all right, we started out with the base layer, then kind of your long john mid layer, if you want to call it, and your outer shell. So what would you talk about next as being important?
Excuse me. Yeah. So the next would be insulation, and insulation is an interesting one because, I again, just for sake of discussion, I put it, third. But depending on the base or the lofted insulation or puffy insulation that you've got, it can be worn under the outerwear or over the outerwear, right? It just depends, and there's so many different applications you couldn't possibly go through all of them. But when you're looking at a lofted or puffy type insulation, again, you have a couple choices. You've got traditional down, which are, generally speaking, goose feathers. You have a treated down. So those feathers are treated with like a durable water repellent finish for the most part. You have a down or a treated down synthetic blend. So we use that quite a bit. And then you have a pure synthetic. And, in my opinion, I think that a straight traditional down is not really something that's suitable for hunters, whitetail hunters or big game hunters. I think it's just it takes too much effort to think about keeping it dry. And, we hunt in inclement weather, and we're not hunting most of the time in crazy cold temperatures. Really that's, very suitable for, high altitude mountaineers, right? Where it's very dry and very arid and very cold. So treated down is good. Treated down synthetic blend is good. And then synthetic blends. And depending on, if you're going to Alaska, Bo, I'd say,
I would choose synthetic, pure synthetic insulation, because even if that insulation gets wet, it doesn't lose its ability to keep you warm. If you were going down to Arizona or Colorado for elk, I'd say that you're probably just fine using a treated down or a down synthetic blend. For whitetail hunters back east, I think any of them you could choose, just because, quite frankly, most of the time you're not that far away from the truck. And the farther off the grid you go and later into the season, I would again trend more towards synthetic. But, a lot of people will overlook, a lofted jacket, but man, the warmth of the weight, like I think you said your dad had picked up that vest, they're so lightweight and so compressible, but the warmth they provide is immeasurable, really.
Yeah. No, definitely. That was the first insulation piece, like a technical insulation piece I got was that Kelvin Light vest, and I used that forever, and still use it from time to time. I love it, and it, which is a synthetic insulation, and I don't think I own any pure down insulation. I think all just about all mine's synthetic insulation, so I can't speak too much from the downside of things. I was introduced to synthetic from the beginning, but besides like a sleeping bag, which is another thing. But yeah, so
yeah, well, so those lofted pieces come in different forms. Jackets with hoods, and then vests, and so it's kind of up to the wear. A lot of times those lofted vests will be worn, say under an outerwear layer, and then the jackets, especially with hoods, tend to be put on, over top an outerwear layer. So, an example would be, I'm hiking up to a ridge top to glass, and I'm obviously generating heat, so I want to dress comfortably cool. And then I get up on the ridge top and I look over the other side. I start to glass, and it's breezy up there, and I've got sweated up. So, my base layer is working to move the moisture to the next layer, but, I'm getting a little chilled up there in the wind. That's a perfect time to apply, the puffy jacket. And what that does is it traps the heat, but it also, because it traps the heat, it promotes the moisture to move through the system that much quicker. So, I hear it quite often. People hike up to the ridge and they're a little damp because they exerted. And instead of waiting, depending on the base layer they have, and instead of waiting, the 5, 10, 15 minutes for that layer to dry, they immediately strip that off, put a new base layer on, and then kind of go about glassing. And that exposure to the elements and having to carry an extra layer is kind of unnecessary if you just throw that lofted jacket on, and then you'll just cook it dry.
Yeah, no, that's a huge point there, and something that you'd kind of taught through the rewarming drill as an extreme measure of showing how that works. But I think we'll get into that in a few minutes. But with keeping everything on and not stripping off that base layer or anything, like you said, you're pushing the moisture through your system, and that outer puffy layer may be, it may be damp, but you're dry against your skin, which you're still going to be warm. And especially if you're in a situation like somewhere like Alaska or anything, can be very important and even life-saving. I just got back from Alaska a few weeks ago for the first time, and it's definitely rains a lot all the time.
Yes, it does. My wife just pulled up to me.
No, you're fine. You need a second?
So, nope, I do not. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So what were we talking about?
We were talking about having the puffy layers, as far as I was saying, how it's pulling moisture away from your skin when you throw it on when you're wet already, say from hiking, and that outer puffy layer may be damp, but it your base layer will be dry, and you've kind of cooked it dry per se, and you might feel wet on the outside or damp, but you're not losing any heat in that sense.
Yeah, correct. And so that is a perfect case in point. If people are ever in that scenario, right, that is a like a, I don't know if physical manifestation is the right word of what we're talking about, to where you see that moisture coming through all those layers and then hitting the outside of the garment. And then depending on the ambient temperature, that moisture that hits the outside may actually be, you may actually see frost building up on the outside of that jacket. But at that point in time, unless you've chosen the traditional down, that jacket is still going to keep you warm. Your base layer is dry. You are completely, happy and have your head in the game. It doesn't matter if that insulated jacket is, have some moisture on the inside or is frosted up on the outside. It's just doing its job. And, that's, again, to go back to the traditional down, if you have that and moisture continues to move through over the course of several days, that moisture will begin to make those feathers kind of clump, which breaks down the loft. And then, the jacket begins to become compromised as far as warmth. So, but yeah, that's exactly what that a good system is supposed to do, is to move that moisture all the way to the outside. Your body is the internal combustion engine. It is the heat source that is going to move that moisture through the layers and push it to the outside. Yeah,
and I definitely noticed, that every person's body is different. And you kind of have to, when you're building your system, or if you're working with someone like me to help you build a system, when you're looking at it, you got to understand how your body works. Do you sweat a lot? Or when when you're moving, are you really pushing out moisture quick, or do you get cold easily, or how that works? And all that, comes into play with building your system that's tailored directly for you.
Yeah, there's so much to it, Bo, and you hit on it. Everybody's physiology is different. Quite frankly, depending on the day. So let's say you come out west and go on a 10-day elk hunt. As those days progress and your hydration levels, change, and one day you're hydrated and the next day you're not, and one day you have enough calories on board and one day you don't, the physiology is going to change, right? And so one day, whatever system you had that you wore that worked may not be as good the next day if, you start to become compromised. And it's really interesting. If you gave, let's just say I gave everybody, say I gave 12 guys, every piece of big game, subalpine gear, for instance, and we're going to go on an elk hunt. I can almost guarantee you that not any one of those 12 people is going to be wearing the exact same system on any given day, or would even choose the exact same layers. Let's say I limited it to like 10 layers. Everybody would pick something slightly different based on their experiences and how their body, historically performs, right, in that environment. And that's what I find so fascinating. And that's why I can't really say like, okay, wear this, and this. And I mean, I can do it and you can do it, right? If somebody really wants to know a system and, and purchase, but ultimately the best thing to do is to, try some things and see what works and then continue to modify your system. And that's why I like really versatile layers. Cause I can continue to, move them around within the system based on how I'm feeling that day and what the environment's doing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And like you said, with having those versatile systems. So like for me, no matter what, I'm going with a lightweight base layer against the skin. And for me, I like the Core Lightweight series that I've been wearing. And, from there it may change, in Colorado, I was using the Kelvin active jacket actually right after that. Most of the, like probably 90% of the time, I went straight from the core lightweight to the Kelvin active, which is an active insulation that John can dive into a little bit more here if he'd like. But so I would use that, and then sometimes though I would go right from that base layer to the mountain jacket and then throw the Kelvin active over top of that. Because the mountain jacket provided that little bit more warmth and with the Windstopper capabilities, but having that Windstopper closer to my skin for me personally works better with as far as being able to breathe for me. So that's I kind of play. What I'm getting at here is there's a million ways, and what John was getting at, there's a million ways to look at your system and how you can build it. You just got to test it out and see what works for you. And you may find out that one piece doesn't work, or maybe it's just the way you're layering it. And just being able to test that out and get a feel for how your body reacts to it.
Yeah, the Kelvin Active jacket and the mountain jacket are two pieces that I rarely go anywhere without. They're versatile. I can wear one on top of the other, or vice versa, depending on the conditions. And then I always run. I've been running the core lightweight hoodie a lot recently. Just that hood provides not only a little bit of warmth in the back of my neck or some sunshade, but it's got the face mask in it if you're, dropping into setups and stuff. But, I encourage people to, I like to say exercise your apparel system, but, we shoot our bows and we train and all this. It's like, you should go out there and figure out, how these clothes perform. It would be kind of similar to, if you gave your 16-year-old kid, the keys to the Ferrari the first day he gets his license, and he kind of, chugs his way through the gears and gets up to second or third gear and has it going 60 miles an hour, and he's absolutely stoked, right? Because it's the fastest he's ever gone. But then you get in the driver's seat, having driven a while and have some experience, and you get it into sixth gear and have it going 150 miles an hour and get the full performance out of it. Like, that's where you want to be. And all of a sudden, when you realize that you can get 150 miles an hour out of these clothing systems, then they really start to show their benefit. And, it just takes a little time, and, it's fun. I mean, I think it's fun to go out there and try all these things and see what works and what doesn't, and, swap things out. But once you understand the true capabilities of some of these clothing systems, you really understand what you have, and then you never look back.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been kind of addictive for me to try out different things and move it and move things around and switch this out and that out. And again, I definitely get the luxury of that, working for an archery shop that's a Sitka dealer, but I was doing that before I even started there, as far as just wanting to, mess around with my system and see how your body reacts. Because when you go on a hunt out west, so like I did for the first time a few years back, and you're going in for 7 days, the first time, out in the wilderness, camping, backpacking, the whole bit. The last thing you want to worry about is your clothing system, and as far as failing or anything like that would end your hunt. I want to stay out there. If I have 7 days to hunt, I want to hunt 7 days. And that was understanding how that all works together is crucial. And that was one of the biggest things. So, and John, you when you were training the special forces, there was a certain drill that you conducted called the rewarming drill, correct?
Right. Yep.
So do you want to cover that a little bit here?
Yeah. So, because we taught in Alaska, and we wanted, you teach somebody the system, but you want them to kind of have that aha moment. You want them to fully understand, right? You only have so much time with these guys, and you want them to understand that the system will go 150 miles an hour, right? However they choose to kind of build it. And so one of the things we did, and it had a lot of other applications that I won't get into, but so one of the things we did was we would come down kind of out of the mountains after, normally about a 4-day patrol. And, one of the things you want to continue to have guys be disciplined. And so, you pack up, you pack your small little camp up, thinking that you're going to have to spend more time out in the field, right? Because you never know. I mean, even when you're a hunter, but certainly when you're a soldier, like nothing's a given. And you don't want to just trash pack, and you don't want to just think in your head, well, I got 4 days, and yeah, if this thing gets wet, I can just gut it out. You want to try to keep up on your nutrition, hydration, everything, your organization. So anyways, we'd come down out of the mountains after about 4 days, and just because it's Alaska, I mean, a lot of times the weather can be, basically savage. And it didn't matter. And we would come down summer, winter, and we would have the guys essentially take all the electronics and weapons off their body, and they would just set their pack down. They weren't able to, repack it or anything. And we would, it was all monitored, but we would have them in groups. They would get in the water, and that water could be a frozen lake that we had them chop a hole in, or it could be, a mountain stream, something along those lines. Rarely the ocean, because salt water has different effects on clothing. But anyways, we would get them wet, and we would leave them there for a requisite amount of time based on this chart we had. But let's just say anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And so the idea was that not only were you wet, but you were cold enough that, potentially some of your cognitive function may be not faltering, maybe just a little altered, but also your hands and feet, hands more than anything, were cold. And so there was a level of urgency, right, when we got them out of the water. And so the idea was you got out of the water, and you and your buddy, and you would go to your packs, and then there was a whole process, and basically it was a set priority. Number 1, what do you do? Number 2, what do you do? Number 3, what do you do? And so we would go through that progression, and essentially it was, you need to trap whatever body heat you have left and try to cut down on any convective heat loss. So generally you'd put a hat on, and you'd put a puffy jacket, and if you had puffy pants, you'd put puffy pants on. Okay, what's the next thing? Well, you need to seek shelter. So then they'd set a tent up. Then they'd get in the tent. So now they're out of the elements. Then they'd put a ground pad underneath them, so conductive heat loss wouldn't harm them as much. And they would go through this progression, and then eventually at some point they would, light their stove. They would drink hot liquids. Then they would have a hot meal. So again, to add calories to their body, to add warmth to their body, to stoke their internal combustion engine, to begin to dry the clothes. And then they would get in their sleeping bags, this whole thing, and then over the course of several hours, they would dry their clothing out. Now, we wouldn't stay there, because generally speaking, that would take, maybe upwards of 8 hours to completely dry everything, but long enough that they realized that the system was working, that all of a sudden they were dry. Certainly their base layers were dry, that they were warm, that the situation was under control, that if they had to ride, the next 24 hours out in there, that they could continue the mission in this case, or for a hunter to continue his hunt and not have to give up his great tag if he, fell off the raft, or, jumped in the river for whatever reason, or got soaked in the rainstorm trying to get back to his tent. And so I did this, you did it. I watched yours, and then I did it for Eastman's Hunting Journal, and just kind of showed, that if you build a proper system, that the management of moisture actually happens quicker than you would think, and that you warm up and kind of get yourself collected far quicker than you would imagine in such a dramatic situation.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. I mean, I'd always heard that when you get wet like that, you strip your clothes and try to dry them out around a fire. And that's obviously not the best way of doing that for a variety of reasons, whether you could either get a fire started and, you're losing all of your heat once you take those clothes off. So by being able to, trap the heat with putting the puffy layers on, and with your system being built correctly to be able to move the moisture out and everything there. So when I talked to you about that first at the ATA show again there, you were talking about it, and I was like, I want to try it. And you're like, yeah, that's you can do it by just soaking your clothes in a little tub or anything like that and putting them on and seeing how it works. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'll do. And then about 3 weeks later, found a frozen pond and decided to try it. And we filmed it for Bucks and Bows to kind of show our customers and everything why we were so adamant about clothing systems and everything there. So yeah, it was extremely interesting. Getting in the water, the first about 2 minutes were pretty terrible. And then after that, my body just numbed. So I sat in there for 15 minutes and then got out. And that's when I realized how tough everything was. You lose cognitive functions, your motor skills. Trying to zip up my jacket was one of the toughest things it felt like I ever had to do. And, get my stove lit up to get a hot meal in my body and get my my body moving and everything. But that was extremely interesting to do.
So, yeah. And so that's why it's so important to, one, it's dramatic and people pay attention when you do something stupid, like jump into a frozen river or lake. Right. I like to say everybody wants to see the monkey dance.
Yeah.
They want to be entertained. So that's a good way to do it. But really what it shows is you have to have, so let me start from the beginning. Like, you learn if you packed properly or not. And you learned if, you put things in the reverse order that things need to come out, right? Like real kind of, to me anyways, basic disciplinary things. But you also learned that you have to have your priorities, we'll call them survival priorities, in order, because like you said, zipping up your jacket was difficult. So if all of a sudden I got out, however I got wet, but if I got out, and I didn't, if my first step wasn't to put, say, my puffy jacket on, and my first step was to, let's just say, unlace my boots or to try to start my stove, that may be the only thing that I'm able to do with those hands. And if it's not the number one priority and it's number 3 or 4, like, you're probably going to be in a world of hurt, right? So have your priorities in order, put the jacket on, get some kind of watch cap on, trap the heat, get out of the elements. Like, those kind of things are what I just think people need to think about, especially when they come out west, or if they go up north, or if they're like you, hiking miles and miles off the road and and hanging tree stands. They should understand that the dexterity of your hands is going to go quick, and if you don't, if the first thing you want to do is grab a lighter, especially if it's like one of those little Bics, and you're trying to get it going to start a twig, well, first of all, you're probably going to drip water right on the flint and kill it. But you're gonna utilize the couple precious minutes you have doing something like that, as opposed to putting your jacket on and setting your shelter up. And it's at a certain point, you're probably not going to be able to do those things. Like, it's funny to say, but if you've ever been there, like you have, like, it's almost scary that your hands don't work and you're trying to will them to, and they won't do what you want. There's no fine motor skill. None.
Yeah. And I didn't even almost realize it, but the guys that were there, I mean, I had a few people there to watch to make sure nothing, happened serious. But when they said they looked at me, when I tried zipping up my jacket, the look I gave them, like, it looked like fear in my eyes. Like, even though I was in a controlled environment, it was just like, I can't believe I can't do anything. There's nothing I could do about it. And the quicker, you were able to do that from getting out of the water, the better. and get into that sleeping bag and have your puffy layers on and watch the moisture move. But I'll put some links in there to the article that in the podcast notes to the article that you wrote on it for Sitka, as well as the couple videos that you and I both did, so that people can go in and kind of watch it instead of hearing us try to describe it there. But
yeah, I mean, it's entertaining. It's entertaining at least, right?
Yeah.
But so rain gear's the last layer. Well, rain gear's the next layer, but let me jump past that and we can circle back. Let me talk about the last layer. And this definitely applies to the person who's divvying out. In my opinion, the sleeping bag is the last layer of a clothing system. And the reason I say that is, when you're out camping in a tent or bivvying out in a bivvy sack or whatever the case may be, like that sleeping bag to me is the sanctuary, that I come back to, at night, so to speak. And that no matter what happens during the day, I get wet, I get hot, I get cold, I dry my stuff out. Like I want to come back and get in that sleeping bag. And that is something that to me cannot become compromised. And, if you do have a dramatic situation like you and I demonstrated where you fall into water, getting into that sleeping bag wet is what has to happen, in my opinion. And if you choose the wrong sleeping bag, if you choose the wrong insulation, you're not going to be happy about that. And if you're doing nothing but coming back, let's just say you have to hike back to camp and, every day it's a couple hours or whatever the case may be, you're hiking with camp on your back and you're getting in your sleeping bag and you have damp clothes on from sweat, over the course of days, because that's how you dry your clothing system out, is to get into that sleeping bag. If you're not choosing the right sleeping bag, you are giving up a little bit of safety every time. So I actually don't like to stop the clothing system at just the clothes, but I like to say the sleeping bag is the last layer of the clothing system.
No, that's good to know from that standpoint, and same thing from my experience starting with a down bag. It using something that's synthetic is so nice to be able to warm up dry out all your clothes. Like you said, jump into your sleeping bag. I mean, when I first went out west, my first thought was, I'm going to bring a set of clothes to sleep in. That's what I'm going to do. And quickly I realized that, especially if you have damp or wet clothes, you should jump in the sleeping bag that way. And if I have any other, like say, extra layers that I don't want to wear in a sleeping bag because it's I'll be too warm, I stuff them down in the footbed to help dry them out by the morning.
Yeah. So, and I think this point is critical to talk about because, like you said, I hear this from a lot of people, and a lot of them are, I'll call them real experienced folks, but they want to have a dry set of clothes to quote sleep in. So for a couple reasons, I'll argue against that. First of all, you have to spend the money to buy those clothes. So if money's, a limiting factor, you're going to have to spend more because you have to have more layers. Two, if you're carrying them on your back, you're going to have more weight and volume in your pack, which you may or may not have to give. And then third, the clothes that you do have that you're hunting in day to day, right? Let's just say you've invested in a Sitka system, because that's the way I look at it, as an investment. That you've got these clothes and you've built this great system. I want that to work for me 24 hours a day. And if I get in the sleeping bag with my clothes on, and if they're damp, they're going to dry out. And I know that maybe sounds a little counterintuitive to people, but there's really no other way to do it. I'm not going to give up a great sunny day of weather that I could be hunting to take all my clothes off and dry them on a bush. So if I can do it every night when I'm in my sleeping bag, assuming I've chosen the right sleeping bag and clothing system, the clothing system's working for me 24 hours a day.
I wake up in the morning, I'm ready to hunt. And, you know, I've left some weight and some bulk behind. And it's just a simpler system, because the alternative is, if you take those clothes off and you lay them in your tent or you hang them in the overhead, we all know what condensation does. They're not going to dry. Now, maybe if you're in Arizona or someplace like that where it's super arid, you may get that. But I just think it's a bad habit to get into. But, you know, for the reasons stated, I think that I sleep in my clothes. In turn, I can bring a much lighter sleeping bag, because I've got the clothes I'm wearing is adding to the, you know, essentially the kilo value, right, of whatever sleeping bag I have. So I'm running a lighter weight bag. I got less clothes in my pack, and I'm spending less money to do it. So for all those reasons, I just think that it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, and something that you don't hear as often as being part of your overall clothing system. And down bags can be lighter and a little more compressible. You got to kind of look at weighing the options there, and how you want everything to work together. And even though that the synthetic may be a little bit heavier in the sleeping bag and everything, you're not bringing any extra clothes because the other ones are wet.
Yeah, you know, I don't condone this, because obviously people have to test it for themselves and get a little experience. But, you know, all my years in Alaska and even down here in Montana, like, I pretty much run a 30-degree sleeping bag all winter. And in the summer, I don't know if I can get a lighter weight sleeping bag, but, you know, I don't bring as many clothes necessarily, but I run a 30-degree sleeping bag in the winter. I mean, extreme situations aside, but for the most part, I can get away with that if I'm in a tent, I have the proper clothing system, I'm eating the proper nutrition and hydrating well. You don't have to bring a super big sleeping bag per se. So I kind of go counter to what people say. They're like, well, synthetic weighs a little more. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm running a lightweight bag. And most times with down, because people want that higher rating, they're going with a warmer bag than they need. Then they're sleeping with it unzipped and their foot outside and all this. And it's like, well, you really didn't need to bring all that weight home.
Yeah.
You know, and that just comes with experience. But
no, that's really good to hear that side of things. So the other thing, John, so I could probably talk to you about each of those for another 2 hours in depth, but I kind of want to move on a little bit here to if you were just starting to build a system from the ground up and you had, you know, a limited budget, what would be the most important pieces that you would start with?
So, like I said, I'd buy a base layer top and bottom. I'd buy a long sleeve, some type of long sleeve top, and then long bottoms. And even if I don't wear the bottoms, I'll always bring the bottoms because weather changes quite a bit. I would buy a pair of soft shell pants. This is for big game. I'll start. I'd wear soft shell pants. I would do a puffy jacket and rain gear. Like, that's bare bones minimum.
Yeah.
That I would, you know, that I would say a person would need. I would recommend if you have the money, then I would also buy like a Windstopper type jacket, like the mountain jacket that we talked about, or something similar. And then hat and gloves.
Yeah.
Would kind of round it out. Yep. So as far as clothing goes, I don't know if you want me to go into specifics, but for the whitetailer, I would go lightweight base layer, top and bottom. Then I would go maybe a heavier weight, like a heavyweight top, some kind of hoodie maybe. I would look at potentially a loft vest, and then I would look at Windstopper bibs and a jacket. That's a system I think would take a guy, you know, maybe not early season, but certainly like the majority of the season that that people are hunting, October, November. Now, if they're going to hunt like you'd, Bo, then I'd say they probably need a pair of soft shell pants to hike in, and then put the bibs on once they get there. I don't exactly know how you're doing that, but
that's exactly what I'm doing. Actually, once it, like, say late October, November, when I'm doing those all day sits, hiking into the stand, I actually wear the Timberline pants from the big game line. And then once I get to the tree stand, I throw on the either Fanatic bibs or Stratus system and go from there. But yeah, I definitely like wearing, some sort of the soft shell pants to so they breathe well when you're hiking in further. But for the one nice thing too about like some of the bibs, and I'm a bib guy, but for whitetail hunting and like the Fanatic bibs and now the new Stratus bibs in the whitetail line, you can unzip them as well to vent heat. But if you're going, like I said, if you're going a few miles in and you're gaining some elevation or dropping down in, in my opinion, it's better just to have a more of a soft shell and pack the other ones in. So
yeah, are you when you're doing that, are you carrying a climber with you or what?
It depends. I've kind of went away from climbers for the most part and do hang-ons, and I just have a lightweight platform stand and a few sticks that I take in with me. I generally don't hunt very high in the tree. I mean, everyone just tries to be, it seems like 20, 25 feet up. And for the most part, I hunt anywhere from 8 to 14 feet. I don't hunt very high.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Unless I can get a preset stand in there, I do it. But otherwise I just carry 3 little 3-foot section of sticks and a platform, and I get in some weird looking trees that my cover is usually good enough to hide me, but I like to pick the spot and not have, and pick the tree that I need to be in to be most successful, and not dictate my stand telling me what tree I can get in. And that's the only limitation with climbers and with being a little bit noisy. But I mean, saying that, I did kill my Ohio deer last year out of a climber. If I'm in like a big oak standing and stuff, it's a little different. But when in Pennsylvania where I'm at, I'm hunting a lot of nasty creek bottoms and some hemlock thickets and things like that. So I like to be able to tuck into different places.
Yeah.
But
cool. Very
cool. So that's kind of. Well, yeah, I appreciate you going into those different pieces there. And so from the big game side of things, there's some new pieces that Sitka came out with this year, and you were a big part of designing them. The two biggest things that caught my eye were the new Apex system. That was the hoodie, the pants, and the backpack, as well as the Mountain Hauler 6200. Do you want to get into those a little bit?
Yeah, so for the Apex, really, it's designed for the hunter who values quiet, I would say, above all else. And we all value quiet, but we all have our own interpretation of what quiet is. And we're very dedicated to making durable products, because we know that our consumer values that. And again, it's an investment. Like, you're going to have it for a long, long time, whatever product you buy. And so it was very difficult to try to come up with something that was quiet, but lived up to our durability promise. And so really what we ended up doing, because I understood we needed to have something quieter for those particular type of hunters, that we had to go and develop our own textile. So, I had to go to Asia and basically start putting stuff together and have them make us something. So the textile that you see in the pants and then the Apex hoodie in the shoulders and the arms, that's a proprietary textile to us that we developed, and it gives us the durability we require and our consumers demand, but also it's really quiet. And so I've been fortunate enough to hunt in that system for about 1.5 years now. And, a lot of crawling, running knee pads and stuff. And, that it's held up really well. And then we introduced a new midweight wool. We've never had wool. We introduced a midweight wool that's in the body and the arms and the hood of the Apex hoodie. And that's got we'll call it a blend for lack of a better description, but it's a nylon merino wool blend. So it's a 17.5 micron merino wool, just exceptionally fine, really comfortable. But with the nylon on the outside, it provided the durability that we needed for big game hunting, for crawling and carrying packs. And it also allowed it to print really well. But you have all the great qualities of wool, the natural antimicrobial, the warm when damp, the softness, all that kind of stuff. The Apex hoodie has some really unique features. It's got, like I said, it's got a hood, but it's got our integrated face mask, which is really great for dropping into setups really fast or making stalks. And got a kangaroo pocket on we'll call it the belly. So we moved it up a little bit so that it didn't interfere with your waist strap on your backpack. And then inside that kangaroo pocket, I call it, are two internal mesh pockets, so that if you drop things like diaphragm calls or wind checks and things like that, they don't rattle around and make any noise. And then finally brought over something that we'd had in the military, and that was elbow pads. And the elbow pads are removable if, the person doesn't want to use them. But, I just realized so many times crawling on mule deer and elk and even antelope that, you get pinned down by a doe or a cow or something like that. And, that's the time that I've got a rock under one elbow and a pine cone under another. And so put elbow pads in that. And, it doesn't affect my draw cycle, but, again, if people don't want it, they can remove it. And then the pants are actually pretty simple. Mesh pockets, mesh cargo pockets, silent snaps, mesh pockets within the cargo pocket for rangefinders and GPSs, things like that, so things don't rattle around. And then just tapered the legs a little bit to prevent swooshing when you're stalking, and then allow you to just pull your socks up over the bottom of your pant legs if you choose to go in on your final stalk like that. So I'm pretty stoked about the system, Bo. The response has been, amazing. So pretty excited about that. And then the pack is, 1,850 cubic inch day pack, no frame, so it can't make any noise. Kind of sits off your shoulders, really low profile. So if you're crawling or ducking under brush, there's nothing to hang up on. 3 straps to hold your bow if need be, but it really wraps. It's kind of body hugging. It's a great pack for a lot of ladies if they want to wear one of our packs, because it fits just whatever your shape is. But lots of pockets for organization. And then the cool thing is, and it's something I played around with for a couple of years with some weed eater cord on some of our existing packs, is it's called the cam cable. And the cam cable, there's a left and a right. So if you're in, shoot lefty or righty. But, how many times I've been in setups where I'm holding my bow and a guy's calling, or I'm waiting for something to develop, and, the animal comes in and pins me down, and I get in a staring contest. And, it seems no matter how much I work out, that 5-6 pound bow starts weighing a lot after 15 minutes. And then, I get my one chance to get a shot, and, I'm already tired before I ever draw my bow. And you're able to just deploy the cam cable, drop your cam in to the cable, and then it takes all the weight off, and I can just wait there and let the situation develop, and then draw and shoot, pretty unencumbered. So just stoked about the Apex system as a whole so far.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome system. I got my hands on it, and haven't picked up any myself yet, but just playing around with it in the shop and everything, and seeing it at the ATA show. A couple of our customers had picked it up for turkey season in Pennsylvania as well.
Yeah,
and they loved it because it's super quiet, and it seems like the material as far as the pants is a little bit. If anyone's familiar with Sitka's line already, between the Ascent pant and the Mountain pant, it kind of seemed like it filled that gap in between there.
Yep. It's got a little bit of a grid backer, but that actually lets the face textile sit off your skin, promotes really good airflow. Got a little bit of warmth. I've been fortunate. I hunted in Lanai in March maybe, after some axis deer, and actually warm, and it got into the low 80s.
in the heat of the day, but you had to be really quiet to get in on these critters, especially with very little wind at the time. And yeah, it did exceptionally well. So yeah, like I said, I've been able to hunt it for a while now. I'm pretty excited how it came out. And then the mountain hauler is basically kind of the pack I had in my head for a large meat hauling mountain pack, right? So for the hunter who's hiking in and spending a couple days, or going in for a day but wants to carry meat out on his back, and it's kind of my interpretation of what a hunting pack should be. And it's got a lot of unique features, probably more than I could probably go into, but 6,200 total cubic inches, but the pack rides at 5,200 non-expanded in its traditional form. Everything, any traditional strap or anything you'd want to pick up is rated to 150 pounds. The meat goes internal to the pack, so it's a stiff aluminum frame. Every critical connection point is connected directly to that frame for the most efficient transfer of weight in to the wearer. But the meat goes inside with a load sling, again, directly connected to the frame. And then, how many times have we loaded up our packs and you got all the meat, and then you're sitting there looking at the head and hide and antlers, and you're like, geez, how am I going to strap this to the pack? So we solved that and just gave everybody antler straps, we call them. So I think they're 60-inch long antler straps that you girth hitch onto the pack. Plenty of room to wrap, twist, tie, elk and mule deer and bear hides or whatever you got, and strap them down to the pack really securely. Everything that you need when you kill is in Sitka orange. So the antler straps are Sitka orange. All the connection points you need are Sitka orange. The load sling straps are Sitka orange. So, when you're out there and your cognitive function's going down and it's cold or it's wet or you haven't eaten, you're in grizzly bear country, you're trying to do things with a headlamp. I never appreciated all the straps being black or gray or whatever color they were. And it got all confusing to me. So I like to say the mountain hauler is simple, intuitive, and functional. That's really what it came down to. Those were my design priorities. And I think we achieved that in a sub 7-pound pack. And I'm pretty stoked by that as well. I've gotten to carry a couple bulls out with it. Very fortunate to do that. So pretty excited to see how it takes off. The response so far has been really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to see some of these pieces in action myself this year and see what happens. I got an idea though, John. You're saying you carried out a couple bulls in it. How about you send me some of your luck with elk, and I'll give you some whitetail luck? Can we switch that?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Maybe we could do that. Could we do that for like a year or two?
Yeah, honestly, just once, I'll be good. I'll try to figure it out from there. But
yeah, like I said, certain species, for whatever reason, I don't want to say come easy, but you find more success than others. It's kind of interesting that way,
Yeah.
At least guys I talk to, it seems to kind of work out that way. But
yeah, I've had as many close encounters as you can imagine in a couple years of elk hunting without even releasing an arrow. But some of it I look back and like, how didn't that work out? But here I am, and I'm going back again. So I'll be heading back.
Well, it gets addicting. I mean, you're hunting dinosaurs when they're bugling and stuff. I mean, I get such a primal feeling when I hunt elk. Like, I might as well be a caveman with a spear in some regard, right? It's just like it's like, I don't know, something just clicks in the DNA, and you just like, I'm just like back in the Stone Age chasing dinosaurs.
Oh yeah,
awesome.
When I hear a bugle and just taking off after them, and then whatever the scenario is, it's just a feeling like I can't describe, and that's why I even know that say 85% of the time you're tired, you're wore out, and all this stuff, and you may not have action. It's worth it for that even if it's a couple minutes of just mind-blowing action hunting elk in the rut, it's got me driven to go back. And this year I'm going to be doing it for at least 2 weeks. So just keep,
Are you going back to Colorado?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the same spot, and I've got to learn the area over the last few years, and I think that this is my year. I'm saying it's 100% success rate. So,
well, there's a lot to be said for learning the area, right?
Yeah,
and going back and knowing, I busted an elk here, and this was his escape route, and so if the same scenario is going to happen, maybe I can cut him off this time, and it'll happen. You end up getting in enough setups and scenarios, and eventually they start to fall in place.
Yeah, I mean, I've screwed it up enough to hopefully I'm learning from it and can change it. I mean, I've been able to find the elk, and now it's just time to capitalize. And I'm really confident that this is my year. At least that's what I keep telling myself. So
yeah,
it's going to end up good.
Well, the kind of a mentor of mine that kind of has been helping me, because I'm certainly no expert at it, but I've had success every season I've gone out, which I should knock on wood, but he told me, he said, a lot of times success and failure on these animals is based on split second decisions, that if there's any hesitation and, you want to think about it, sometimes that's all the delay it takes for that opportunity to kind of not present itself. And you almost say, he says, you almost have to get to the point where you're working on instinct, and you're not thinking too much about it. You're just more reacting. And the one thing I've learned about elk is I was able to be far more aggressive with elk than I was with, say, mule deer. And certainly if I was coming from the whitetail background, it's a completely different ball game altogether. It's like you got to be super dead quiet. You got to keep, obviously you can't not hunt the wind, but and you don't want to move and do this. And it's like elk are not whitetail. I mean, you have to be aggressive. Elk make a lot of noise. They make noise talking to each other. They make noise walking and running and breaking limbs and stuff. And you can just get away with a lot more than you think. And you have to be a little bit aggressive. And I wasn't the first few years. I was hunting elk like I would mule deer, and I kind of relate mule deer to being more surgical, right? Like a sniper kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Where elk is a little bit more like an assault force. Like you have to be a little aggressive, and you can't be afraid to kind of push it a little bit, and then just take the first good opportunity that's presented, not the perfect one, but just the first good opportunity that presents itself, and it'll happen.
I'm not part
from an expert perspective, but yeah,
that last part you just said about a good opportunity rather than the perfect one is what I'm learning as it's going through. Is there's when whitetails, I know when I need to draw, and I can. It's just I don't know. I've done it for a while now, and I just feel like I have that part down. When it came to elk, there's so many split second decisions when I should have drew and it didn't happen, and right. I missed that that split second window. But anyways, John, I don't want to take up any more of your time here. We went over the allotted time that I said I would take from you here, but man,
it's been fun, man.
That was an awesome conversation, and I think we really got into building a system and the importance of that altogether. So I can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking to me about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the discussion. And like I told you before we jumped on the air, but, I'm excited for you and the podcast and to see where you take it. But I just love the concept, Bo. I mean, there's so many folks that want to come out west and just have no idea even where to start. And just the whole idea of East Meets West and what you're going to bring and to your listeners, it's going to be exciting to see, and you're going to help a lot of people, man. So I'm stoked for you. I think this is a fantastic service that you are offering right now.
Hey, I appreciate that. And like I said, when I was telling you earlier, the biggest thing for me is it was such a life-changing experience for myself to be able to do that I want to be able to have other people go through that same thing, and it just helps you in all aspects of it. And the listeners have heard me talk about that in my intro episode, but I can't stress it enough. When you do something like this, put yourself out of your comfort zone and, head west per se, it's life-changing, and it's going to be hard, but it's doable, and it teaches you a lot from a personal standpoint as well as hunting. So definitely do that. And again, thanks, John, for the kind words.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm guessing this is probably not going to be the last time we talk. So
no, I hope not. We'll have to dig into some more things here, but hunting season's coming up, so I'm sure it'll be after that when we can have a good recap of the season, right?
Yeah. Well, good luck to you, man. Remember to have fun, and let's circle back and tell some stories.
All right, and I'll put links in the podcast notes to everywhere where you can find out about Sitka Gear, and also the articles and videos that I was describing. So, all right, John, well, you take care.
All right, Bo. You too.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.